Hello everyone. We are going to be talking for hopefully a short webinar on biology and behaviour and the importance of understanding how biology can affect the way our dogs behave. And as always, it gives us insights into ourselves a lot as well. So I'm just going to share my slides with you. Okay, so biology of behaviour. So this field explores, as you can imagine, a huge range of different things. So we're not going to be going into absolutely everything. We are going to be doing an overview, but just to give you an idea of the systems and the biological systems that affect how we behave and why it's important when we're working with dogs with any behavioural issues, and we're working through rehabilitation, that we understand this. Now, some of this might be a bit sciencey at times. It could be a lot more sciencey, but hopefully, the more we get to understand some of these things, the more we can know ways in which dogs might need support. Um, and I've put here at the side sort of why changing behaviour must start with understanding, is that this is such a huge part of when we're rehabilitating our dogs, and understanding their needs, because if we miss out this part, we could be missing out a huge amount of really important data on how to support our dogs. So this field explores genetics and epigenetics. So that's looking at the inherited traits and then the environmental factors that shape behavioural tendencies. Neurobiology, so the role of neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine in mood and reactivity. Endocrine system, how hormones influence attachment, aggression, stress responses, and behaviour throughout life stages. And physiological health, and how medical conditions like hypothyroidism, pain, or gut health imbalances can contribute to behavioural challenges. So I don't expect you to read all of those. They're just a few studies that I've come across. I could give you lots and lots more, but it would be very boring. If anyone wants any studies and wants to look through them, please let me know, and I can send them to you. So I've caused this the common battle because it really is part of the job of a behaviourist and trainers as well, that come across dogs that may have behaviours that are challenging to the humans, and all we're kind of presented with is we need a fix for this. And this is totally understandable. If we've got a dog that's lunging and barking at other dogs all the time, or is biting us, or um, causing us a huge amount of stress in our life, then obviously, like anything, we just want that quick fix. And sadly, because of the culture that we live in, and the previous sort of ideas of what training dogs should be, is it's that the expectation is that we are just going to teach the dogs how to behave better. And the problem is with that understanding is that if we don't understand what's driving the behavior, if we don't understand the emotions behind those behaviors, then using things like operant conditioning, so simplified, if we're using positive reinforcement, so adding good things for the behaviors we want and punishing the behaviors that we don't want, and then yeah, we are going to see behavior changes. The problem is that quite often what that does is masks the actual underlying cause of those behaviors in the first place. And that's why looking at the biology of the behavior is really the initial essence of what we need to be doing when we're coming across dogs that do have behaviors that challenge us. And I try not to say challenging behaviors anymore, because actually some of these behaviors are totally normal for that individual and the context within with what they're in. But these behaviours can be challenging for us. So yes, we feel like they're challenging behaviours, but actually it's more that they're behaviours that could be totally normal for the context in which the dog's presenting those, but they are obviously challenging to us. We do have to remember that our lives, not only our dogs' lives, but our lives have become very far away from what sort of nature intended, in the sense that there's, we're a lot busier these days. There's a lot more external pressures on both us and dogs than what we used to have. So let's have a look at the different things that we can look at. So obviously we've got genetics. This is where it all kind of starts. Genetics do influence behaviour, and traits like anxiousness, impulsivity, excitability, and sociability have genetic roots and can have genetic roots. Genes interact with environmental factors which shape emotional responses, and that's something we've got to be really careful of, that we don't split these two things up all the time. We will never be able to know with a lot of the behaviours of dogs exactly what part of the behaviours are genetically predisposed and which ones are those environmental. And as we'll look at in a bit as well, that's even very simplified as well when we're just looking at just genetics and experiences. There's so many different variables that make us who we are and make the unique beings that we are, whether that's humans or dogs. Which gives us a lot of challenges in behavioural genetic research. So most traits are polygenetic, meaning multiple genes contribute to behaviour. So when people say that there's an aggressive gene or that there's this gene that does this, actually it's so much more complicated than that. And there's a massive complex system of how genes work and how they're turned on and off. So it's very difficult to separate that nature versus nurture in individual cases. But we know known genetic links to emotional states. There is the MDR1 gene defect, which is associated with low tolerance for anxiety and stress. Genetics and health that overlap, making it hard to pinpoint primary causes of behavioural issues. And aggression cases may have genetic influences, but proving direct links remains complex. And this is why, I don't know if I say in the next slide, just... No, so no two dogs are alike, just as no two lives are the same. Their individuality is their greatest gift. And I think one of the biggest issues that we get is an over-reliance on how we approach certain cases, whether we're trying to train that dog or support them with emotional and behavioural issues, is that we focus very heavily on breed. And we see this a lot, that there's a heavy... leaning towards what breed, have certain breed specialists, and the breed of a dog gives us insights without a doubt. There are small insights that it can give us. It can allow us to understand possible genetic traits, but it's not nearly as a powerful influence as has been suggested in the past. There are studies now that show that we really do need to be looking at the individuality of that dog. So the breed can give us clues. It definitely doesn't give us all the answers, not even close to the answers. So we have to be very careful of that and making sure that we don't get so hung up on the breeds we have. I have 3 Podencos, which are Spanish hunting dogs, and are known for their love of hunting. If that's sciencey enough. And they are all hunters. They do think about hunting as soon as they leave the door. That is definitely what they're predisposed to do. There are many things about them that I go, yeah, there's similarities, but they are 3 very, very different dogs who need totally different support systems and a totally different understanding, due to the fact that they're not just Podencos. They are individuals. And it would be very similar to thinking that everybody from the UK was a certain way, or everyone from Holland was a certain way. We do actually have certain cultural as well as genetic sort of predispositions for certain things. But we're all humans at the end of the day. And yeah, we're still very much unique and individual within where we're from and our genetic predisposition. So, so get that block out of the way. It's very annoying. Little block that's so the neurological and biological effects on aggression in dogs. So yeah, brain deficits and emotional responses, morphological, anatomical, or physiological brain issues can affect emotional stability. So we have conditions like hydrocephalus, which can be visible sort of through MRI, and but small brain deficits may go undetected, and it's to do with a swelling in certain parts of the brain. It used to be seen as being quite rare, but actually people are seeing more cases now that it's becoming easier to detect. So these are the types of things that we really need to be kind of thinking about. Prenatal stress can result in low stress tolerance and social difficulties in puppies. So yeah, the stress on mums can really affect how their babies come out behaviourally, sort of their personalities, and whether they are predisposed to be more fearful. So things like neurotransmitters linked with like aggressive behaviour. We've got things like low serotonin, which increases impulsivity and risky behaviours, noradrenaline, dopamine, GABA. All of these regulate the arousal and aggression thresholds. And I'm sure many of you have heard of serotonin, especially on different webinars of mine, fluctuations because of the link with gut health as well. And this may explain increased evening aggression, which is really interesting. So melatonin will rise in the evening, serotonin will drop. So that may be reasons why we see peaks of aggression in the evening sometimes if we've got a dog that is showing aggressive-like behaviours. Okay. We've also got things when we're looking at sort of health issues that are more neurological, things like epilepsy. So people think of epilepsy as being very much shown in things like tonic-clonics. So tonic-clonics they used to be called petit nails, and that's where the dog or the person will go into actual fits, physical fits, and will quite often convulse and shake. And I think that's what most people think of when they think of epilepsy. I know with humans, I'm not sure if they've discovered this with dogs yet, but with humans, you're looking at about 70 different types of epilepsy. It's a really complex thing, and I have something called temporal lobe epilepsy, and my seizures are totally unnoticeable to anybody else other than my mum. My mum notices if I'm having a seizure. But this isn't due to anything, her just knowing that I'm obviously feeling uncomfortable in those situations, because my perceptions change. I will start hallucinating. Things like walls will close in on me. I sometimes go blind as well. And it can actually change the way I feel as well. So it can have emotional impacts on me. So I can feel overwhelming feelings of grief or sadness, for no apparent reason whatsoever. Now, obviously, with dogs, if we're looking at that type of epilepsy, it's going to be extremely difficult to diagnose. The only reason that people knew that something was wrong with me was because I expressed it verbally, and then we went to the MRI stages. This can come across as aggressive behaviour in children, and if they're not able to express themselves as well. So there would be a high likelihood that there are certain dogs that may suffer from this, that are very hard to diagnose with this. Again, you have things like absent seizures, where you see just a sort of glazed look usually, or a dog will just be staring into space. So so when there is aggressive behaviour, sometimes it can be due to epilepsy, but don't just assume because you haven't seen your dog fit or convulse that they're not experiencing these things. And then we have just your overall health. So health conditions and their influence on canine behaviour can really impact on perception and response. I think all of us can agree that if we are unhealthy in whatever way that is, it is going to affect how we feel. And if we feel low, if we feel tired, if we are finding things sluggish, I know with certain issues that I have, I always say it's like walking through a treacle every day. It just makes everything just that little bit harder. Um, these are not behaviors that you are going to easily recognize in a dog. Your dogs can still be extremely active, still run around, still play, um, and yet be suffering with chronic illnesses. So poor health can lower stress tolerance, increase anxiety and fear-related reactions, which means that dogs may exhibit aggression due to acute or chronic pain, infections, or inflammation. Chronic pain, again, it's extremely difficult to diagnose. So most dogs that go to the vets with chronic pain will not be diagnosed unless we ask for a more thorough exam, or if we go to a vet that is more specialised in physio or traumatology. So chronic pain quite often goes unnoticed. It's a very common thing to go unnoticed in dogs. And again, if we think about people and how people express chronic illness and chronic pain, it is quite often through slight behavioural changes and then verbal things. So it might just mean that that person, yeah, is more irritable, a bit more snappy, might end up in more arguments than others. And people would just think that they just weren't being very nice. And actually, because those people can verbalize that they're not feeling well, we understand it better. With dogs, we don't have that. They can't verbally tell us that there is an issue. So chronic pain quite often goes undiagnosed. And even in vet situations, you've got to understand that dogs will shut down quite often in those situations. We're seeing a vet for a very short amount of time. And vets are predominantly trained to deal with acute issues. The chronic issues are a lot harder and a lot more complex usually. So the common health conditions affecting behaviour, things like hypothyroidism can reduce emotional stability and increase irritability. Cushing's disease, which is an overproduction of corticosteroids, put my teeth back in, which lowers stress tolerance, exacerbating anxiety and behavioural challenges. And this is why there is just such an importance of getting a vet assessment for any dog that is showing aggression issues. And I would be personally with all of my clients, I have got certain vets that specialise in certain areas where we will look into those certain areas. So if there's certain behaviours that more present with things like possibly epilepsy or a neurological thing, then I would send them to my vets that more specialise in those areas. Vet physios can be fantastic resources as well, because you can have a lot longer. So just getting if there's not anything majorly evident, but it's just the behaviour that's showing us the problem, then having just a check over with a vet physio can mean you've got a much longer period of time with somebody that will recognise certain things in the gait, and then they won't actually touch your dog until they then contact the vet and get a referral from the vet. But it just means that they can start giving information to vets that the vets might not be able to gather in the short window of time that they have for their assessments that they have. Things like blood tests, hormone analyses, orthopedic and neurological exams can help identify underlying health factors, and then looking at CT or MRI scans may further look at diagnostic insights. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. I think it's one of the biggest things for behaviour practitioners. I know for the behaviour practitioners that I talk to regularly and work quite closely with, one of our biggest frustrations is the lack of recognition of the biological factors of behaviour, and how common it is. There are suggestions. It's only anecdotal, really, from what I've kind of seen. There is one study, I think, found sort of between 25% and 80% of dogs with behavioural issues had an underlying medical issue. Now, obviously, the medical issue isn't always the driving force of the behaviour, so it's not the main. It might be that there is more a trauma experience. The dog's gone through PTSD, or that there is something that it has caused them emotionally to be struggling. But because they have an underlying health issue, they find it harder to cope. So it exacerbates the situation. I know from my experience, a huge, massively high proportion of the dogs, I would say at least 80% of the dogs that walk through my door and that I work with, there is a medical issue going on. We didn't go hugely into the gut. I've got lots of webinars on sort of that and the influences, but yes, again, there's the whole gut behaviour link as well. So making sure that we are aware of this and aware that biological factors can really have a massive influence on how our dogs behave is just it's essential when we're trying to support them, because at the end of the day, if they have a health issue and we are trying to train the dog or change the behaviors without identifying and sorting the root cause, then we've got just a dog possibly that is going to increase in their poor behavior, or that the behaviors will get better, but the dog underneath is suffering. And then we often see an explosion of behaviors sort of later on down the line. The main thing is the dog will still be suffering. There still will be an emotional issue there. The dog will still not be happy. And I know that everybody that's got a dog, that's all they want. And we want is their happiness and for us to get along well. So thank you for listening.